Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we are discussing about transport of materials across plasma membrane. We know that plasma membrane is a bilipid layer containing some proteins. So the materials are transported across this membrane in different ways. So let's start. Before that, a short note regarding this topic is given below in description box. So don't forget to check out that. Transport of materials into and out of cells are of different types. These types are included in this flowchart. So, take a look. First, transport across this membrane, mainly two types, passive process and active process, depending on the energy needed or not. Passive process do not require energy and active process requires energy. That is the main difference. Next, passive process are of two types. First, diffusion. Second, osmosis. And this diffusion again classified into two, simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Again, the facilitated diffusion, two types, channel mediated and carrier mediated. So that is passive process. Second, active process. Active process again two types, active transport and transport in vesicles. In this, active transport is again classified into two, primary active transport and secondary active transport. Then transport in vesicles includes endocytosis, exocytosis and transcytosis. So this is the types of transport of materials across cell membrane. Next, we are moving into each type of transport. First, passive process. Passive process means the movement of substance down a concentration gradient, that is higher concentration area to lower concentration area until the equilibrium is reached, that is the movement of substance continues until it reaches the equilibrium. When the equilibrium is attained, the movement of substance stopped. And for this process, it do not require cellular energy, otherwise ATP, because the movement starts from higher concentration to lower concentration. Then, passive process is of two types, as I mentioned earlier, diffusion and osmosis. In this, diffusion, movement of molecules or ions down a concentration gradient, that is higher concentration area to lower concentration area due to their kinetic energy until they reach equilibrium. So that is diffusion. In this, diffusion two types, simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Simple diffusion means this diffusion occurs without the help of membrane transport proteins. That is, without any help, the molecules are passed from higher concentration area to lower concentration area through the lipid bilayer of plasma membrane. That is simple diffusion. Next, facilitated diffusion. As the name implies, there is some help for the diffusion. That is, passive movement occurs with the help of channels or carriers, that is transmembrane proteins. First, channel mediated facilitated diffusion. This is the detailed representation. Most membrane channels are ion channels, that is these channels are selective for potassium ion, chloride ion, etc. So diffusion of ions through this channel occurs because of this selective nature. And some channels act like a gate, that is it changes shape in one way to open the pore and in another way to close it, as in the picture. Okay, so that is channel mediated diffusion. Next, carrier mediated diffusion. That is, a carrier is helping in this diffusion. That is, the solute binds to specific carrier on one side of membrane and is released on the other side after the carrier undergoes a change in shape. You can see in this picture. Example, transport of glucose with the help of a glucose transporter. So, the glucose molecule binds to specific type of carrier protein called glucose transporter. This is the protein, carrier protein. Glucose transporter is the carrier protein. So, the glucose binds to this protein on the outer side of membrane. And as the transporter undergoes a change in shape, glucose passes through this membrane and the transporter releases the glucose on other side of membrane. So that is carrier mediated diffusion. That is simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Next one, osmosis. Osmosis is the passive movement of water molecule across a selectively permeable membrane from an area of higher water concentration to lower water concentration until the equilibrium is reached. That is the opposite of diffusion. In the diffusion, movement occurs from higher solute concentration to lower solute concentration. In the osmosis, movement occurs from higher water concentration to lower water concentration. That is lower solute concentration to higher solute concentration. That is passive processes. Next, active process. Active process means the movement of substance against a concentration gradient. That is lower concentration to higher concentration. And thus it requires cellular energy in the form of ATP. First type, active transport. It is simply active process with the help of transmembrane proteins function as carriers. That is movement of material from lower concentration to higher concentration with the help of carriers. Active transport is two types, primary active transport and secondary active transport. First, primary active transport. This is the representation of primary active transport. In this picture, the transport of sodium and potassium ions is depicted. So, let's take a look. First of all, the carrier proteins that mediate the primary active transport are often called pumps. Here, sodium, potassium pump because it mediates the transport of sodium as well as potassium. First, sodium ions from cytosol bind to inside surface of pump, that is sodium potassium pump. This binding triggers ATP to bind to the pump and thus the ATP is splitted to form ADP and a phosphate group. So, the energy formed from this splitting of ATP causes the protein to change the shape. The change in shape is clearly visible in this picture, this violet color region. And this change in shape helps the movement of sodium to outside. Thus, the sodium ions are expelled out. And then the potassium ions land to outside surface of pump and causes the phosphate group to be released. This release of phosphate group causes the pump to return to its original shape, which moves potassium ion into the cell. Thus, sodium ion is moved out of the cell and potassium ion moved into the cell. This is sodium potassium pump. That is primary active transport. Second type, secondary active transport. It is a coupled active transport. That is, two substances are transported simultaneously through carrier protein. That is, two different molecules are bind with the carrier protein and then transported. In this picture, calcium ion and sodium ion are simultaneously transported in first part. That is, two different molecules are simultaneously transported. The energy needed for this transport is supplied indirectly by primary active transport pumps, because the primary active transport pumps maintain a concentration gradient, usually sodium hydrogen concentration gradient. This gradient provides some energy, and due to this energy the secondary transport is occurring. Secondary active transport is again two type, antiport and symport. Antiport means, as the name implies, the two substances are moved in opposite direction simultaneously. But symport move the two substances in same direction simultaneously. That is antiport and symport. So, active transport is concluded. Next is transport in vesicles. It is an active process. That means it requires energy in the form of ATP. And in this, the substances moves in vesicles. That is, it moves into the cell and out of the cell as in vesicles. In this picture, the vesicle formation and then transport of materials is clearly depicted. Okay, examples of transport in vesicles. First, endocytosis. Endocytosis is the movement of substance into the cell, as in vesicles. Next, exocytosis. As the name implies, the movement of substance out of the cell in vesicles. And usually, these vesicles fuse with the plasma membrane and release their content into extracellular fluid. Next is transcytosis. That is the movement of substance as a result of endocytosis on one side and exocytosis on opposite side. So that is transport in vesicles. And that is today's video. Hope you like it. Keep watching. Thank you.